on a much-awaited Supreme Court decision on petitions challenging the ban on hijabs in schools and colleges in Karnataka expected today at 10:30 this morning.
Right, Gargi, a bench of justices as Hemant Gupta and Sudhanshu Dhulia had reserved its judgment on its pleas against the Karnataka High Court judgment, refusing to lift the ban on hijab on the 22nd of last month after hearing arguments for about 10 days. And during those arguments in the top court, the lawyers appearing for the petitioners had insisted that preventing the Muslim girls from wearing the hijab to the classroom will jeopardize their education.
That's right, as they might stop classes, and they had raised various aspects, including on the state government's February 5th order, which banned wearing clothes that disturb equality, integrity and public order in schools and colleges. Well, let's go across to Shrija now for more. And Shrija, this is a massive issue there in Karnataka. It's been hugely controversial. It's led to school and college closures, etc. So everybody, they're really waiting to know what the Supreme Court will decide. Right, Shrija, if you can hear me. All right, we seem to have lost.
Well, it's a big day for especially the students and also for the Muslim community today, because the Supreme Court is slated to pronounce its judgment today on the clutch of petitions that is challenging the Karnataka High Court's judgment, which has, they upheld the ban on the wearing of the hijab in educational institutions. And what's more important to note there, even in the past, we have seen how especially the justices, Mr. Hemant Gupta and Sudhanshu Dhulia, had always had, the history of split verdicts. So it is going to be interesting to watch what really is the verdict or the outcome is going to be with regard to this marathon hearing that went about for at least 10 days. So as far as what the Karnataka High Court had clearly said on March 15th, that is one of the landmark verdict as far as Karnataka goes, it did go on to talk about how hijab is not a religious practice, but dismissing the petitions filed by these Muslim students. They also sought the protection of their right to wear the hijab. And also we went on to see how, especially where the High Court had made a note saying that hijab is just as significant in the Islamic faith. On school uniforms, in fact, they did go on to mention saying that they will have to adhere to the government's order, which the Karnataka government had passed on the 5th of February. Now, that clearly was succumbing to the pressure of the right-wing organizations, and also in terms of what really is expected to examine the Supreme Court. We understand that the High Court, in fact, in this order had observed saying that the protection guaranteed under the Article 25, which is essential or not integral to not. These are certain interpretations that were made in the, in the last few months as far as the High Court is concerned. Now the Supreme Court will also have to consider the contention that the hijab restrictions, are Muslim women's right to privacy and freedom of conscience. Now that was something which was being argued at least in those 10 days of marathon hearing. And as far as the Karnataka government is concerned, they still maintain and stick to, especially saying where the students will have to continue and adhere to the February 5th order, which talks about where no religious garb will be allowed inside educational institutions.
So, Shrija, and on the ground, what is the situation in Karnataka currently? Are girls wearing hijab to, the colleges, then taking them off, going into classrooms? If you could just tell us what it's like over there, because you remember those days when it had become such a huge controversy and they weren't being allowed in and there had been violence and school shutdowns as well.
Well, of course, the top court is naturally expected to examine whether the Karnataka High Court's application with regard to the essential religious practice in this matter was accurate or not. So that is something where we understand the verdict will be pronounced. And, to talk about what really is happening on ground, we do not see much tension, what we had expected or what we had seen in the last few months, because the place that we're reporting from is Udupi, the epicenter of the hijab protest, and thereafter we saw a cascading effect, where several of the neighboring districts had also seen a confrontation, especially with regard to the hijab-wearing students, and also saffron wearing students. So that was the kind of the confrontation that we had witnessed in the educational institutions. We're talking about students as young as 18 and some of them not even major. So there was a communal color, politically that was painted, especially by the BJP itself here in the state of Karnataka. But if you're really talking about what really it is like today, because the verdict is being pronounced, we see that it is calm at the moment, and the schools and colleges are open as usual. But we understand the educational institutions, since the case is still, or the verdict is yet to be pronounced by the Supreme Court, the educational institutions continue to adhere to what the Karnataka government had passed on February 5th, that is barring students from wearing any religious garb, be it hijab or saffron scarves inside educational institutions.